Evening, citizens. It has been brought to my attention that the subject that I discussed at length with my American friend last week um, about reparations to the Caribbean may have been not a genuine story, but just that I had perhaps been triggered by a headline from the Telegraph and I think the Sunday Times, and it sounds as if that probably is true. Um, part of the um, uh, part of the rationale for that reasoning is that the clip that was passed around social media so much in the wake of that was video of David Lammy describing himself as being Caribbean rather than being British, which is what you would expect of a British Foreign Secretary. But um, and that piece of footage is 6 or 7 years old. So it's possible that, well, probable, in fact, even that I've been triggered by that, as have many other people. Um, However, that doesn't necessarily negate the entire narrative of that, or the entire narrative arc of that story, because if it was indeed 7 years ago that he was describing himself as Caribbean rather than British, why would that have changed in 7 years? The only thing that has changed is that he was an opposition MP, and now he is the British Foreign Secretary, occupying one of the four great offices of state. So if he thought that 7 years ago, I don't really see why he would think any different now. But nevertheless, it is possible, um, and indeed likely, that I was triggered by such a story. Um, but as with so many other things, being triggered by such a story, which in another time would have seemed utterly ridiculous and completely unbelievable, is now completely believable. Um, the the figures that were bandied about, 18 trillion, 41 trillion, yeah, are ridiculously large amounts that no country, not even the United States, could afford. So that was suggested to me that that's why the story was a fake. And I guess it was a fake. But it's not surprising that we believe such things now, because although the story may not have been true its in its scale, it is certainly true in its philosophy. And the fact that we now have a man acting as our representative abroad who describes himself as being Caribbean rather than British is actually serious, quite a serious issue, really. So we can console ourselves slightly that maybe this story isn't what perhaps we all thought it was. But this stuff is in the pipeline. It's they ask for 14 trillion or 41 trillion or it was, which is a ridiculous amount, and then they negotiate down to, well, okay, then just give us 40 billion or whatever it is. So, and we must know by now that there is that the rest of the world is sensing blood in the water with regard to the UK, and that not that they really suspect weakness in Keir Starmer and David Lammy, but they actually suspect collaboration. So, but then of course we do have to be careful still, because we can get ourselves into a dreadful froth when stories come up that seem to be outrageous. But just because they're outrageous these days, that doesn't mean that they're untrue. And there are numerous examples of this. But this runs into a deeper point about how can I put it? Um, what you might describe as the dissident right, or the freedom movement, or whatever it is. But it's hard to um, categorize this, other than to say that we are anti the general establishment, anti-establishment. It's funny, I've never really thought of myself as being anti-establishment. Um, it's only once I've really, in the last half a dozen years, I suppose, when I've really began to understand what the establishment is, have I become anti it. But it was never I never fashioned myself as being any kind of rebel or any kind of radical. And I believed that things could be tinkered back into good health. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. And so I reluctantly take on the moniker of being anti-establishment. It's not my natural home. It's, I don't view myself as being a rebel, but evidence has brought me here. So it's one of the things that depresses me enormously is the way that the dissident right just fight and bitch and scratch each other's eyes out over almost anything, and they're always accusing each other of being controlled opposition, and these same boring things that they talk about. And what seems to be a theme amongst so many is the idea that Nigel Farage is not to be trusted. He's not to be trusted. And I don't know if he's to be trusted. I don't know. I can't tell. You know, what we can say about Farage is that he led a one-man campaign for 15 years, or whatever it was, to get us out of the European Union. And he was the only person saying it for all that time. For a dozen years, he was a lone voice, and he was making a nuisance of himself in the European Parliament and being really quite nasty to some of the other um, members there, and they all hated him there. And he, one of the things I admire about him is the sort of, ironically, the sort of Tommy Robinson sort of nature of his position, in that he went into the lion's den and they all hated him and they all despised him, and he wasn't pleasant, and he was really quite personal, not nice at all, and he didn't endear himself to anybody. But what he did was he toughened himself up from being there, and he didn't go there to be liked, and he wasn't liked. And this has parallels with Tommy Robinson as well, in that The thing that I admire most about Tommy Robinson is his moral courage. Now people say he's a grifter and he's a liar and he's a Mossad agent and he's a Zionist and maybe these things are true. I don't know if they're true or not. I'm not in a position to know whether or not they're true. But the thing that I admire about him is that he has been prepared to be despised by almost everybody that mattered. The government, the all the major parties, the media, the police, the legal system. Everybody hated him. Everybody apart from, well, really quite a large chunk of people who had no voice at all. So Nigel Farage has that in common with Tommy Robinson. But people say, you can't trust Nigel Farage. He's just an establishment man. Maybe that's true. I don't know. It seems as if he doesn't. There are certain things that he does that um, there are certain things that he does that make me uneasy. Him constantly throwing Tommy Robinson under the bus is one thing that he does, and he does that repeatedly, and then positioning themselves and um, treating Tommy Robinson as somebody not to be even considered, and just to be, and in that respect, he's no different from the rest of the establishment. So there is that concerns me. There is also the fact that he seems to not want to share the limelight with anybody, and the way that him and Richard Tice turned on Ben Habib, who I think is another person that I really admire, and has um, conducted himself with a certain amount of um, what would you say, certain amount of dignity under fire. I mean, it's just pure misfortune that he wasn't elected, and because he wasn't elected and wasn't an MP, Farage and Tice just dropped him. And Ben Habib has criticised the Farage and the makeup of Reform as a political party, and it seems not to be like other political parties. It seems to be that they have subscribers and not members, and whatever that means, that people maybe can't help form policy. I mean, I don't know what the deal is, but it does seem different, and it does suggest that Farage and Tice and Zia Youssef want to keep tight control of the party. Now, you might think that's a sensible option, but it's not very democratic. But then maybe being a very democratic party is maybe not the most sensible way of breaking the two-party consensus, the uniparty. So many of us, we don't trust Nigel Farage, and I understand why people don't. And I do understand it. And there are people who seem more solid, who seem more principled. People like Ben Habib, people like David Curtin of the Heritage Party. These people seem more principled than him. But the reality is that Farage is the only game in town. He's the only one that's got a shot of breaking up the Uniparty. And things look very bleak at the moment. Starmer is the worst prime minister we've ever had. Certainly in my lifetime. Certainly by a very, very long margin, very wide margin. The Conservatives have chosen to pick a leader who I supported in 2022, but the moment for an ethnic minority leader of a major party might have been possible. They might have gone somewhere in 2022. But that moment is past now, and almost everybody now, as I can tell, sees her as a diversity hire. Personally, I don't think that's fair, but like I say, I think the moment has passed for her, and she's got her work cut out. She's flogging a dead horse in the Conservative Party, and maybe I was wrong about her. Maybe she is a diversity hire. Maybe she is um, just a Nigerian blow-in who has just been appointed for us, much like Rishi Sunak. So, I'm willing to be convinced either way on her anyway. But the fact is that, like I say, it's very bleak at the moment. But without wanting to labour a point about things the darkest before the dawn, the Conservative Party has almost been destroyed. Not quite. It's still, still life in it a bit. But in order to kill the Conservative Party, we had to almost allow Labour to win, and we did, I suppose. I mean, I voted for reform, so don't think I can be blamed for that. But some people would blame me for that, for not voting for the Conservative Party. But the Conservative Party would be almost as bad. But the thing is that the Labour Party it's got this massive majority, but it has no mandate. It was like 23% of people voted for Labour or something, which is nothing really. So the Labour Party are living on borrowed time. But as far as I can see it, and as much as I understand that there are political parties out there that seem more principled, SDP, Homeland, Heritage, even some of the sort of old-fashioned, supposedly far-right parties like Britain First and Patriotic Alternative. I'm not predisposed to vote for people like that, but I do think they ought to be included in the conversation. But it's just fiction, imagining they're going to get anywhere. Farage and Reform are the only game in town. Now, you don't have to trust Farage to vote for him. What I think is, I think that Reform is a stepping stone to something else, something better, something genuinely patriotic, nationalist, and genuinely centre-right party, which the Conservatives haven't been for decades. So, but people seem so determined not to be fooled by Farage. They seem so determined to not be fooled that they are willing for the Uniparty to get back in and the Conservative Party to be voted in next time. Now, anything that approaches the Labour Party or the Conservative Party forming any kind of government next time is nothing less than a catastrophe. This is the only chance we've got. If we don't do it this way, it has to be. If we can't do it politically this way, and it is possible, and at the moment it's actually looking increasingly likely. If we can vote them out politically, this is the only chance we're going to have. And if we don't have that, the next thing it will have to be violent revolution, and all the grimness that comes with that. So, I feel that people are putting their own purity above what is necessary to do. And I do like David Curtin and the Heritage Party. I think I like most of his policies. most of their policies and heritage parties. I do like them, but they're not actually going to get anywhere. What I envisage, what I think would be the best option, is that Farage gets in with reform, and then what happens after that is that then you have a plethora of opposition parties then oppose reform, with Labour and the Conservatives being nowhere, just being rump yesterday's parties, with 20 or 30 MPs each or something like that. That's kind of what I would hope. And that first time round, reform gets a thumping majority. And then as people become disillusioned because he's not tough enough on immigration, then the other parties will harden him up. Homeland, Heritage, even the real fringe parties like Britain First and Patriotic Alternative. I think this is what's going to happen, and nobody wants to be fooled, and I think being fooled is the worst thing, but it isn't the worst thing. Not being fooled and will mean not voting for Farage and letting the Conservatives back in, and then people can be they can console themselves under another uniparty, destructive, globalist, mass immigration, surveillance state, rights denying, semi-fascist party coming in, that they can enjoy that at their leisure. You're safe in the knowledge that they never compromised any of their principles. Now, the thing about politics is politics is the art of the possible. You don't have to trust Farage to vote for him. And you shouldn't trust politicians anyway. You shouldn't trust any of them. There should be no trust. Nobody in America should be trusting Donald Trump, and Elon Musk and Robert Kennedy Jr. They shouldn't be trusting them. They should be watching them like hawks to make sure they do the things they said they're going to do. There should be no notion of trust in politics. They tax us and use our money. We're entitled to watch them like hawks. And we don't have to trust them. And we absolutely should not trust them. We need to audit them, like Musk is doing with all the American institutions. He's not trusting them. And I would caution against anybody trusting any politicians. Politics is not a trust game. We put these people into positions of privilege and power. And in return for that, they should be put under the microscope. Right? You said you were going to do that. Why haven't you done it? Why haven't you? So I saw on X today, which is somewhat of the inspiration for this video, is I saw that there's been a little bit of spat. I didn't read very much of it. Basically, I saw enough of it because it was a great big long script between two of them. There was a video by Connor Tomlinson of the Lotus Eaters, who've done a lot of good things. And they're basically on the right side. But as usual in these things, they'll probably be milk toast for some people. Although I think they've been pretty robust on the immigration. But anyway, the point is that he seems like someone who's on our side. A young man, he's got his head on his shoulders, knows what he's about. and he seems to have been gotten into this spat with the Homeland Party, and the Homeland Party have come, with a broadside back at them, and all this energy is being wasted by the dissident right on fighting each other, rather than fighting the Judean People's Front, as we should always be doing. But this it's just ridiculous, because all this infighting is, I have my reservations about Farage and Reform, and and I want him to be bolder, and I don't understand. I really don't understand why he's not being bolder. You know, he only has to look across the Atlantic and see what his friend Donald Trump's been doing. Donald Trump is being bold. He's being bold, and it's popular. And Donald Trump has, rejected the opinions of the mainstream media. He's quite rightly said, "But you guys don't matter anymore." But it seems as if Farage still cares what they think. And I think this is just, I don't think that it's sinister. I think it's him being overcautious, and I think it's him trying to get things together and trying to be more of a professional political party before, before they have to properly mount an election campaign. I mean, that's just what I think. I don't know. I'm just guessing. But when I see good people on our side tearing each other to bits, it just makes you feel that we're not going to win. We're not going to win if everyone insists that I'm the right one. I'm, me and my party, we're the answer, and those blokes are wankers trying to be pretending to be on our side. And those blokes are wankers trying to be on our side. It just means we're going to lose. There has to be some sort of discipline in the movement. And when we have differences, if we can't talk about our differences privately, we can at least be respectful of each other. I mean, I don't know if that spat they were having was respectful or not, but the fact is that there has to be some sort of discipline. There has to be an element of holding our noses if we don't like Farage, but the idea, as far as I can see, that the best scenario is that Farage gets in next time with a thumping great majority, and the Overton window is shifted so far by that then all the other opposition parties that want to be more hawkish on immigration, for instance, like the Homeland Party, then they can start banging the drum for that. And I mean, Rupert Lowe has shown how far you can drag the Overton window. He's dragged it a long way. He's on the edge now of calling for forced deportations. He's not quite there, but he's getting there. And if they get into government and they haven't got there, they haven't quite got there, then the other parties can come and start haranguing them once they're in government. So there's an element of holding our noses. This is not ideal. And I believe people should live on principle as much as they can, but there's a limit. Politics is the art of possible, and we've got the art of the possible, and victory is possible. Not only is it possible, it's actually likely if we can stop fighting amongst ourselves. What you have to sort of what you kind of have to acknowledge in a way is that if you're inside your own head and you're forming opinions over what's to be done, the most perfect person to have in 10 Downing Street is yourself. I mean, because everybody thinks their own opinions are the right ones. I do. You know, if it was left up to me with no moderation from anybody else, I'd be there making sure everybody bought British cars and wouldn't be allowed to buy British cars. Because not because that's right, but because that's my own bias. And I would think that that was important, but that's my own little hobby horse. Um, so the most perfect person to run your country is yourself. But the next most perfect person is the person who's most likely to win, that you agree with on most things. I mean, you know, philosophically, this is not easy. It's not easy trying to square this circle because we are in the shit that we are in because for so long what we did was we voted for the lesser of two evils. So I'm quite aware that my own philosophy has some contradictions in it. If people had started voting for what they actually wanted rather than just voting just to keep the other guy out, then we wouldn't be in this mess. However, the we do have them on the ropes. We do have them on the ropes. To some people, it might not seem it. If you listen to the legacy media, it won't seem that. But at the moment, the Tories are toast. What, they get 110 seats or something? It's like I don't think they've ever had as few as that. Um, and Labour have just won by default, but they're a house of cards. They're absolutely terrible, and everybody knows it. And they know it more than anybody else, which is why they're cancelling elections and trying to exchange MPs for mayors and locking people up for things that they say. They know that they're on shaky ground. And with Trump's election in America, they know that it can change very, very quickly. So it is. I mean, I generally believe that one should live on principle. That's where you should start from. But sometimes you do have to tailor your principles. Like an example of a principle that I've abandoned, and I'm not happy about it, is the idea, because I used to think that it was, and I've mentioned this before, the idea that everyone that's born within the borders of the United Kingdom is by default British. And I thought I held to that principle for a long time because I thought it was clear and it was easily defendable. And I thought that it made racism or the lack of it irrelevant. But when I realised, when I gradually began to realise that principle was being used against us in order to get more people here who aren't British and don't want to be British and don't like Britain and actually hate the rest of us, then you have to abandon the principle. And I don't like abandoning principles. I feel sort of morally adrift when I have to abandon principles, but sometimes you have to do it because I felt more morally adrift by being taken advantage of like that than actually having to abandon the principle. So the principle had to be abandoned, and like I say, for years, for decades, we've all been voting to keep the other guy out. Doesn't matter how much of a wanker our bloke is, he's better than the other bloke. But when it was a uni party, that didn't make any sense. Once you realise that it's a uni party, it doesn't make any sense once you realise that. Before that, it made perfect sense. But once you realise that it is a uni party, then you have to change your approach. And the single most important thing that we have to do is that we have to get the uniparty out and get them out for a generation at least, if not forever. But if you get them out for a generation, if they do come back, it won't be the same animal. I mean, the SDP now is probably very little to do with the SDP in the early 80s. Having been subsumed by the Liberal and the Liberal Democrats. And that, it was 40 years ago. So it's only the name and the logo that remains, as far as I can tell. But the most important thing of all is that the Tories have been almost destroyed. They're on life support at the moment, but we have to do the same to the Labour Party. In a way, this is going to plan. If you look at it like that, one side of the Uniparty has been demolished. The downside of demolishing one part of the Uniparty is that the other side of the Uniparty gets that much bigger. So it was always going to be easier to destroy one half of it first, and the second half of it was much more difficult. But this Labour government is so atrocious. I don't think that's all that difficult, frankly. So I find myself as well adopting positions that I sort of poo-pooed in relation to the European Union, like the argument all the time with the pro-European types was we must be in it. We should reform it from within, and of course it never worked because they never reformed anything because the rest of the European Union hated Britain and hated Britain's position and our relationship to America and all the rest of it. And so we were never able to reform anything. And it was always dominated by the Germans and the French. Although I say the Germans and the French, what I mean by that is the German and the French establishments, because we found, if only we were to look carefully enough, we found that the Germans and the French people are getting screwed over just the same as we are. So, ironically, I found myself in somewhat in a lot more solidarity with our European friends than I ever did when we were part of the European Union, which is ironic in itself, I suppose. But when I see these fights between people who are all on the same side, it's just so distressing. It's so distressing because we know who benefits. The globalists and the uniparty benefit. That's who benefits. It's taking down Farage is not going to benefit, you know, the Heritage Party, or the the Homeland Party. It's not going to benefit them at all. It's only going to benefit the Uni Party. So I think people are they're going to have to hold their nose. I mean, Rupert Lowe seems to be, like I say, dragging the Overton window back to where it should be. Um, and yeah, in a way we've got time, in a way we haven't got time. Sometimes I think 2029 is just everything will be destroyed by 2029. Um, but on the other hand, if there were a general election tomorrow, you know, would reform be up to it? You know, they might. You know, I mean, I think thing is, I think the way I feel about politics, I think, is if you were to take 650 people at random and put them in as MPs, they would do a better job than the Labour and the Conservative parties have been doing for decades. So I'm not concerned about that. But I would like reform to flesh out some proper policies that they stick to and that they make a stand on, and they're not just trying to sample public opinion. They they need to they need to start forming public opinion, have a policy, defend it, and sell it to everybody else. So I do understand people's reticence about Farage, and I have my own reservations about him. And I don't want to dismiss that, but the prize is greater than having somebody perfect at the top, because my perfect is different from yours, and it's different from his, and different from hers, and you know, a good political leader is one that is an amalgam of most people's preferences. So I oscillate between quite robust optimism to dispiriting defeatism, quite often. And I think reform is just a stepping stone to something else, something better. I hope, you know. I mean, maybe reform can surprise me. Um, Many of us feel if Rupert Lowe were in charge, things might be different. But and I mean, concern for the country should be the primary motivation for anybody. But I suppose you could probably understand Farage wanting to be at the top, considering that he's worked hardest and longest for it. But and the crown is there for the taking, as I keep saying. If only he were to be as bold as we want him to be. But anyway, I just thought I'd throw my two penneth worth into that, because I think this is serious. I think we have a real opportunity, but we're in danger of squandering it in our squabbles, because we don't want to squabble. We don't want to squabble. We want to stay free.